from the quantum computing group, and thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me. It's very exciting to be here. So what I want to talk about is Liquid. Liquid is a quantum programming language being developed at Microsoft Research here in Redmond. And I want to split the talk into kind of two parts. I want to give you some context and talk a little bit about what quantum computing actually is and what kind of Microsoft's stake is in that space and what our group looks like and what we do. And then in the second part of the talk, I'm going to talk about Liquid. It's an embedded language into F#. Sorry, there's no C++ in this one. But it's an embedded language into F#. I'm going to give a demo of what it can do. It's basically a simulator for small quantum computers. But it also grew into a compilation framework. So you can kind of express programs at a pretty high level, compile them into instruction sets that a quantum computer can understand. So kind of what we think it might look like in the future. And then, so that way it will be a scalable approach towards quantum computing. Right, by the way, feel free to interrupt me when we talk. So Microsoft has sort of two groups in quantum computing. That's the Redmond group up top here. And that is a group in Santa Barbara in California. So the guys in California do basically physics. It's called condensed matter physics. They think about like actual chips, what is a good platform to do quantum computing on. So there's a topologically protected way to do it. That means errors are suppressed. And the main problem actually building a quantum computer is the problem of noise. So the Microsoft vision is to build a computer that from the get-go has only very little noise. And so that group is definitely the leader in that field. Right? So there are different approaches toward quantum computing. And Microsoft is funding some of them around the world. So there's no experimental group really at Microsoft, but we're working with external partners. That's kind of what quantum computers look like. They are basically semiconductor physics devices at very low temperatures. So they are quantum dots and nanowires that become superconducting at very low temperatures. That's a picture of a computer in Copenhagen, Charlie Marcus's lab. That's a picture of a computer in Delft in the Netherlands. It's Leo Copenhagen, both get funding from us. And both kind of aspire to building a computer that's very robust against noise. That's by no means the only technologies that have been proposed. Many technologies have been proposed to build quantum computers. Very promising ones are so-called ion traps. You kind of capture many ions inside an electromagnetic trap. They're confined in a potential. And then you can manipulate them using laser beams, change the internal degrees of freedom, and that can be used to build a computer. That technology has 5 ions at this point in a very, very, very well-controlled way. You can even load more, but then kind of the fidelity goes down, the quality of the operations goes down. But there's scalable proposals that you can have several of these traps that interact, basically shuttling ions between the traps. So that's actually quite cool. I like that technology a lot because it's very mature. You can get your hands on the system, you can play with it. I mean, if you know people in these groups, the experimental groups, but it looks very promising. This technology looks extremely promising from the scaling point of view. So it's basically classical chip technology. You use lithography to put some structures on a substrate. The substrate is silicon. The structures are aluminum oxide, and basically they become superconducting at very low temperatures. And then you can have information encoded into them. Basically, it's the direction of the current that's flowing. There will be a persistent current flowing, and it can be clockwise or anti-clockwise, and you can encode information into that. It sounds like kind of crazy, but it's actually possible. So you can have kind of clockwise and anti-clockwise current flowing at the same time, and you can use that as bits 0 and 1, and you can have at the same time flowing clockwise and anti-clockwise. Very promising from the scaling point of view. It's easy to make big structures based on that, and but it's very difficult to control again. It's very noisy and very hard to control. So there's a company in Canada called D-Wave. Some of you might have heard of that. So their computer is based on that technology. It's really big. There's a big debate going on in our field whether it's an actual quantum computer or if it's another device that does maybe an annealing task or whatever. So there's a big debate. I don't even want to go into that debate right now. But that's the technology. There are many other proposals. That's the Microsoft proposal, is so-called Majorana molds. very robust against noise because they're protected, their ground state, which is the state where you encode your information, is protected by a gap. And if you you have to overcome a big energy barrier in order to even bring your system out of that ground state. The problem is that there are so far no large-scale demonstrations of that technology. 1 qubit has been demonstrated. Right now the experimentalists are working on 2 qubit systems, but it's kind of slow progress. And a bunch of other technologies, most of them have shown 1 or 2 qubits, but none of them has shown thousands of qubits yet. But our field is in an exciting phase at this moment. There are now startup companies, there are big players, there's Microsoft, there's IBM has a group, Google has a group in quantum computing, and in Europe there are a bunch of groups, smaller startup companies, so there's a lot of stuff happening. And we think at Microsoft that it's about time, it's a good moment in time to actually provide tools to compile higher level algorithms down to, ultimately to platforms like this. It's not clear what's the best platform, which one of these will be the winner, but we want to have a stack that can kind of target all these platforms ultimately. If there any questions at that point? All right, okay, cool. So, oh, by the way, this is a picture of that machine. So that the actual chip is just down here, that tip. It will become superconducting in the millikelvin range at the bottom of the dilution fringe. And there's a whole stack of control. It gets kind of warmer the further you go up in the stack. Right? And there's a lot of kind of classical control technology needed to manipulate these superconducting qubits at the bottom of this device. A lot of microwave technology gets into that, and there are only very few people in the world who can actually do that. So you cannot buy that stuff off the shelf. And that's a very small machine that has only basically 1 qubit at this point. Okay, cool. So what would we actually want to do with a quantum computer? Why do we even care? Right? What's the advantage of having a quantum computer over a classical computer? Certainly it will not replace a desktop. That's for sure. It will be very specific tasks that we hope to speed up with a quantum computer. So you might have heard of Shor's algorithm. Essentially, that's an algorithm that would break RSA because it allows you to it allows you to factor. Okay? It allows you to factor integers in time that's polynomial in the bit size of the integers. It's roughly cubic in the kind of the simplest embodiment of that algorithm. It's cubic in the bit size, whereas the best classical algorithm is sub-exponential. So if you try to run that classical algorithm against RSA 8024, you will not finish it in your lifetime. Maybe the NSA has the capability, but some people doubt that also. But with a quantum computer, you could, with a relatively small circuit, you could actually factor 1024, and you would actually have to kind of escalate the bit size very rapidly to keep up with that. Question, yes?
Well, what's the point then? Because people will just use a larger bit size and you're back to square one.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you could try to outrun the quantum computer by going to larger and larger bit sizes, but then you know you're playing a losing game, right? You know that once there's a big scalable quantum computer, it will scale polynomially. The attack will scale polynomially, and you would have to, if that scaling goes on and on, like kind of a Moore's law scaling, you would have to keep up increasing your bit size, and you never know if there's maybe a state actor in this or some kind of rogue player who doesn't disclose how big their quantum computer is. You don't know. Maybe there's some foreign country that has a big computer, so there might be uncertainty then. What's a good big bit size? The NSA, interestingly, earlier this year, they gave out like a pamphlet recommending to not switch to ECC crypto at this point, and to switch to RSA keys of a really ridiculously long length in the medium term, like 8,000 or even more.
8192 and
2048
in the short term.
Which people really wonder why they did that and why they did it at this point, because big quantum computers are not even on the horizon at this point, right? Why would they recommend these things right now? It's not clear. Maybe they see a concrete threat of quantum computers. There's other theories, obviously, that maybe they want people to switch to less secure systems. That's another.
Well, the other theory I heard is that they found a break in ECC.
Ah, okay, yeah. So
that's theory.
ECC, just a little aside on that, because I'm really interested in that question. You need smaller keys classically to get the same level of security as you need for RSA, roughly like think 160-bit ECC roughly corresponds to 1024. There are slightly different opinions, but roughly that's the ballpark. And a quantum computer to attack the small, like the ECC, would even have to be smaller. At least that's the conventional wisdom, than a quantum computer to attack RSA. So like I have a project right now where we try to understand exactly what's the overheads. It doesn't look like it can attack ECC easier. It's about the same complexity for these bit sizes, maybe even worse for ECC, but it would be a threat for both ECC and RSA encryption, that's for sure. So the question is, if we have a big quantum computer, what do we do? People propose all kinds of crypto that might be quantum resistant, based on learning with errors is a popular thing. Multivariate polynomials is another thing. But all these things have not been investigated at the same level as RSA had, right? RSA has been around for 40 years, ECC basically for 30 years. People have looked at that in great detail. And so it came as a bit of a surprise that the NSA came out and said, switch soon, right? Because these other systems have not been really tested.
Huge surprise. I read that the day it came out and I flipped.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, but anyway, so that was a big, basically our field even started only after that paper by Peter Shor, showing that factoring can be done on a quantum computer. Before that, people did not really care as much about quantum computing. It was more like a very quirky computational model. And afterwards, people said, oh wow, this model is actually rooted in nature, right? Nature in principle can support that model. And wow, look what we can do with it, right? We can solve problems where we don't know whether they are in P or not. Like factoring is not known to be in polynomial time. And, but it's definitely in quantum polynomial time. So there were a couple of other algorithms, nothing as spectacular really as this, but one other application is certainly solving systems of equations. You get an exponential speed up. You get a matrix system, AX is equal to B. So you give an A and B. You want to find a vector X that solves the system. So classically, of course, it's kind of polynomial in the size of that matrix. Quantumly, it turns out it's polynomial in the logarithm of the size of that matrix. There are a bunch of caveats there. For instance, you cannot really read out the solution vector because it's kind of too long. It has length n, right? And your algorithm is supposed to run at polylogarithmic time. But what you can do is sample from that solution vector. So if you can kind of encode your problem in such a way that you can, from a few samples, learn something, that's a good application. And also another caveat is it will not work for arbitrary linear systems. They have to be sparse in a very precise way. You have to kind of have a matrix that's not only row and column sparse, you must also be able to compute the entries efficiently. So if I give you a row and a column label, you must be able to produce that element that's in that location. You must be able, if I give you just a row, give me all the non-zero elements in that row. And that must be done doable with an efficient circuit. That's not always true. If I just pick a random sparse matrix, that's not true. But people have showed, for instance, that some scattering tasks, like radar cross-section tasks, can be actually mapped to that algorithm. And that's certainly interesting. But many people believe the killer application is really just simulation. So take another physical system that you deeply care about, and then try to infer something about that system from a quantum computer. Right? You want to kind of map that system to a quantum computer, and then use the quantum computer dynamics to predict the other system. And there's a lot of problems, say, in chemistry or in material science that potentially could be mapped to that. And I have some examples in the demo later of simulating chemical systems. So Dave has done a lot of work in that area.
Weather prediction on that?
Sorry?
Weather prediction.
Weather, I'm not sure if that can be easily mapped. I wondered myself, but I'm not sure. I don't want to speculate. So in general, like chaotic dynamics, I'm not sure if a quantum computer can give you an advantage there. Because it's always kind of a very kind of specialized thing you can infer about your system. In these quantum mechanical simulation tasks, it's typically just the ground state energy of the system that you can estimate. So that's kind of a limited thing. In weather, I would think you probably want to know more features. Okay, and that's by the way Richard Feynman. He basically proposed that it would be nice if nature could serve as a computer. It would be nice if you could harness nature. So many people say that he basically had that first idea for a quantum computer. Some people object. Some people say in Russia there was another guy behind the Iron Curtain named Yuri Manin. So he, around the same time, apparently had a similar idea. I don't want to get into who was first, but it was in the early 80s that people started wondering about these devices. Okay, so the real killer applications would be to use these chemistry simulations on an actual quantum computer to design better catalysts. So kind of you would have a search space for many possible catalysts. And each one you could evaluate using a quantum computer. You could tell without actually building the molecule, right? Without kind of synthesizing it and making a chemical reaction that makes it. You could ideally predict what's the yield that you could get from that molecule, from that catalyst. And that way you could explore a huge space of catalysts and hopefully find something that nature actually does for us. That nature, there are bacteria in nature that have the ability to capture nitrogen from the atmosphere and turn it into something solid that plants could then consume. And nobody really understands how nature does that, how these bacteria do it. And it's very difficult to understand even the molecular structure of these enzymes. And there's a hope that maybe a quantum computer with only 100 or 200 qubits could actually help to explore that space and help us find better catalysts. There was a question? Yes.
So you mentioned that one of the things quantum computers can be used for is cryptography by breaking RSA.
Right.
Are there any quantum ciphers available? So can they help us improve the same security we've lost if we use a quantum computer?
Right, that's a great question. Are there ways quantum can help? Can you flip it around and help? Yes, there is. Quantum mechanics really can help to solve certain tasks. It's not public key crypto, but quantum key exchange, for instance, can be used to establish a common key between two parties, even though they have never met. If they have a joint quantum channel between them, and the quantum channel can be just like a glass fiber, or it can be even free space optics, the two parties can, if they have an authenticated channel, they can use that to make to make joint secrets. The problem with it, and that is actually technology you can buy right now. There's, in Japan there are a bunch of companies. There's one company in Switzerland. I think in the US there's also a company. The problem with it, it scales very poorly with the distance. It drops off basically exponentially. The rate with which you can generate key drops exponentially. But I think even in telecom fiber, they have demonstrated 50 miles or so with acceptable speeds of key, kilobyte per second rates, kilobit per second rates. They have done 50 miles or maybe more. So that's a technology where quantum actually helps. People also look into technologies that would be resistant against quantum attacks, but they would be still classical technologies. So this is an active area of research called post-quantum crypto. I don't know if that answers the question.
There aren't any quantum resistant algorithms out there yet that are publicly available.
Yeah, but we have that kind of, you have to make assumptions, computational assumptions, that this problem is probably hard even for a quantum computer, and then you can try to build a crypto system around it. But they have very, very few things now, and to my knowledge, there's not even a single public key system that will be resistant against quantum attacks. Okay, cool. There are a couple of other, like carbon capture is kind of the same thing, that nature knows how to capture carbon, like trees and all plants do it. But to design good catalysts, there are some catalysts, but they have a very low yield. And the same thing, we could hopefully explore that space of possible catalysts better with quantum computer. Material science, same thing, could help. What Microsoft wants to know, and Google and others, is quantum computing helpful for machine learning? That's a very exciting question. I don't know the answer. I'm kind of a bit on the skeptical side. I think a quantum computer is really good at tasks, say correlation finding tasks. So that's really underlying Shor's algorithm for factoring, is you're able to do to find correlations in extremely long data, like a very long vector, and now you can find the period of that signal. Right? It's periodic with an exponential long period, but you can find it somehow. it's not clear to me that machine learning on unstructured data actually has any features that we can exploit in quantum computing. It's kind of up in the air in my mind. It is known though that it gives you polynomial speed up, so instead of doing kind of n things, you only do square root of n things. That might be a killer, but it depends on the overhead. So if those are square root of n things that you need to do, but they are heavy quantum operations that are hard to do, it might not be a big gain. Right? But typically in that area of machine learning, we have only polynomial speed ups compared to the best classical algorithms. But there are some applications, for instance, clustering and those things, their speed ups no. Okay, I wanted to give you just some very basics. There's not a lot of math here, but just kind of what is the idea, why is it faster? So the reason why a quantum computer has an advantage is the quantum computer can explore different computations, different computational paths all at once. So instead of doing it kind of sequential, you could follow them all by just running the same instruction sequence, but you can have many things that you can try at the same time. That sounds too good to be true, but nature actually says that's possible in principle. It's called the superposition principle. If you know linear algebra, it's really just a sum of vectors. That's called a superposition. And each vector itself, each basis vector is one computation. If you can have a sum of many things and then follow them all at once, that would be kind of the parallelism you would get. But then you need something else. You need kind of the bad computations. You don't want to observe them at the end, because otherwise you get overwhelmed with useless things. You want that the good computations sort of amplify each other, and the bad ones cancel each other out. And there's this interference principle, which is like water waves. So you want to kind of have computations where the bad path interfere like a positive and a negative amplitude, so that you don't observe them at the end. Like if you have like a valley and a mountain in a wave, they can cancel each other, right? And they kind of get zero here, no amplitude. And the same kind of we have to arrange in a quantum computation. Otherwise, you have just a probabilistic classical machine, and then you're as powerful as a classical machine if you never have any negative probabilities. So, that's a very top level picture. And kind of the superposition principle tells you that in a quantum computer you don't just have on and off. You have sort of both on and off at the same time. And if you have many of these switches, you have 2 to the n things, right? If you have n of them, you have 2 to the n settings of the switches, and you all have them all at the same time. You follow them at the same time and you track what happens to them. Right? And kind of the embodiments are, for instance, single atoms in an ion trap, or spin in a quantum dot system. So there are many systems that afford these two-level systems. Classically, you kind of have one input, one output, right, in the computation. When you have a second input, you produce a second output. But quantum mechanically, if your computer is a quantum computer, you could have this crazy superposition of all 2 to the n inputs. And by doing just one operation, you manipulate them all. So that sounds really nice, but there are several catches. So there are kind of limitations to quantum computing. So one really weird thing is that you cannot copy quantum information. That's actually at the heart of that key distribution protocol, is that an eavesdropper who wants to attack the system, if he or she tries to make copies of the quantum information, you disturb it massively. And then you can detect that somebody is listening in. On the flip side, if you have a quantum computer and you want to save the state, just write it to disk or something, you just can't do it, because that would be the same as making a copy. It's basically, it follows from the fact that it's a linear theory, like quantum mechanics is linear, and the copy operation is very nonlinear. If you write it down in its action on a basis, it's a quadratic function, and it contradicts the fact that quantum mechanics is linear, so we cannot make copies. And also, we cannot really read out the entire state vector. The only way you can access it is doing a so-called measurement, which is like read out. And that's a probabilistic process. So you basically collapse the state to one of those basis states. And if you do it again on the same state, say, you might very well end up with a different outcome. Okay, so if you repeat that many times, you might eventually see everything, but you cannot predict which one in a given run you will see. So those are that's actually a very big limitation. It's super hard to come up with algorithms that are still useful even though you have this probabilistic readout. Basically, you have, yeah.
So you don't know which one of the P's you got?
Yeah, no, you will learn the label. In that case, for instance, you learn 42. That would be the answer, the classical answer you get. So you know this, the computer collapsed into 42. But next time you do it, you might collapse to a different label. So that information you get. But you don't know anything else about that superposition, right? Think of it as kind of a probability distribution.
By some weird combination,
Right.
I never see P2
Yes.
come out, but I see lots of P42s.
Could happen.
Okay.
It could also happen that you see P42 on one run, and then you never ever see it again. Because maybe they're kind of like 42, maybe there's an exponential number of little peaks. It's quite possible. And to get the same peak twice is extremely unlikely. But it's possible that still from the label information, you learn something useful. And that's exactly what happens in the factoring algorithm. You get a state that has exponentially many peaks. It's kind of a delta comb. And what you want to learn is the space between the combs. That's the valuable information. And if you do it again, the whole thing will be shifted by some unknown offset. So if you just do it in that basis, it's useless. But Shor realized if you go to a Fourier basis, these combs will all be centered at 0, and their spacing will be 1 over r if the original spacing was r. They're all 1 over r. If you now measure, you get a multiple of 1 over r, and from that you can actually figure out what the factors are. So it's always like very tricky to find the right basis in that vector space to measure, so that from the labels you get the information. But a few examples are known where it's actually very powerful, where we find a good basis. Same with the linear systems algorithm. It's also known that there's a good basis where we can extract. Yeah. Okay. So the question is then how to actually program. Right? So now we get into actual programming languages. So these algorithms I mentioned, Shor's algorithm, the linear systems, and so on, they are expressed in mathematical papers at a very high level of abstraction. You don't see code there. The papers talk about vector spaces, about operators, and whatnot. But really what people also have in the back of their head is the hardware they ultimately want to run it on. And the hardware will support some gate sets, so some elementary operations. They're kind of assembler. But to break it down into that sequence here, it's a multi-level process. Everybody agrees on that. The question is, how do you actually do it? How do you express the algorithms in a language so that the programmer does not have to think so much about the circuits, but nevertheless it's possible to break it down and make an estimate of the resources, tell you how many quantum bits you would need, how many operations you would need, and that kind of stuff. And that's what Microsoft developed. So Dave Wecker, he's the main architect behind Liquid. He wrote a stack that does that, basically through like here, and a little bit optimization already, but basically stops here right now. Ultimately, we want to drive hardware like the one I showed you before, the ion trap and superconducting qubits. And there's another project in our team called Solid, so after Liquid comes Solid, where actually we want to drive the entire control stack. But Liquid kind of stops here and focuses more on simulating the small scale circuits on a classical machine in a kind of very parallel way. So the goal is to have a high level language so that we don't have to think too much about circuits, to have a visualization, so it makes it easy to see what the circuits look like. So they're generated by the computer, but you can render them, you can export them into formats that are nice to be put in a paper. It's important for the researchers, right? They like to write papers, and it's nice to have a visualization there. And what's also nice is it's very extensible, so you can define your own gates, you can enlarge the set of keywords. It's very easy to do that. Very extensible platform. And there are many ways to rewrite the circuits, and to optimize it. You can do sort of peephole style optimization where you look at a part of the circuit and you you rewrite it with something better. So that's all in principle supported in liquid, and it's a lot of ongoing stuff, ongoing work in our group deals with optimization. Any questions on that part? Quickly want to mention that F# is the language, and you will see code in a minute when I do the demo. But F# is, we like it because it's functional. Everything is a function. That seems to be a good match with quantum, because everything is a function there too. It's a very mathematical theory. It's on the other hand, it's a full .NET language. You get the full capabilities of the host language. It's kind of it's the same as C# essentially. You can express it all. They wrote a very powerful linear algebra package, similar to BLAS, if you're familiar with numerical computations, and it included some optimizations such as unrolling code and kind of reordering operators to make it more efficient in terms of cache utilization, for instance. It's all classical optimization, right? We run the quantum operations in a classical machine. And for specific circuits, so there's a so-called subclass of general quantum computations called stabilizer circuits, and that's super important for error correction. So all the error correction circuitry is stabilizer. There's a special purpose simulator called CHP, which is included in Liquid, and there's no limitations for that. So in the public release, there's a restriction for 23 qubits for the academics who can use it, or like anybody can use it, so up to 23 qubits. But for that CHP-based simulator, there's no restrictions. It's unrestricted. And there's a paper by Dave and Krista. Krista is in the research part, and she's the group leader of Quark, actually. So they have a paper describing Liquid, and it's on GitHub, so you can download it. Kind of just give you a flavor of the type of optimizations that Dave did. So you run out of memory very quickly. If you want to simulate a quantum computer on n quantum bits, basically you need to track a vector of length 2 to the n. Okay, so it's exponentially long. The matrix has exponential size, and you need to do that matrix vector product, exponential size matrix times exponential long vector. And you cannot compress it really, right? You can maybe if it's initially very sparse and you just do very sparse operations, maybe you can still represent it using only very little memory. But as soon as you do something that entangles everything, you have a full vector to track, like a 2 to the n length vector. So it very quickly runs out of memory. The question is still for small lengths, say 20 or 30, what's the best way to do it? So if you have an operator that looks like this, for instance, it's a matrix, and that's so-called Kronecker product, it's a tensor product, with an identity matrix. So if you apply an operator that looks like this, it is sparse, it's block sparse, but it's permuted. So if you apply that to a vector, it's very bad in terms of cache, because you will have a lot of cache misses. It's very non-local in terms of memory. It's much better to reorder the tensor product by applying a permutation. And if it looks like this, it's really just a block diagonal matrix with blocks that run like this, block, 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 block. Because it's much better in terms of parallelizing this operation, and it's also much better in terms of cache misses. So that's why Dave does a lot of reordering like that to speed up the code. Okay, cool. To give you an example, what's the quantum hello world example is, some people call it teleportation. It's a circuit that allows you to transport quantum information from one place to another. It's called teleportation because you could do that in principle over very long distances, and it would really transport the quantum information from one place to another. Has been done in experiments, and it's getting the quality of the transport is getting very, very good. So you can have very high fidelity in the transported quantity. And in F#, it really looks like this. So you declare a function, right? And it takes a list of qubits. And then all you do is apply an operator called Hadamard. It creates sort of a superposition of two basis states, that guy. And then you apply another operator called C0, which is entangling the two qubits, and that's the graphical notation for that. So very compact. You have just a register of qubits. You apply one operator, another operator, and that's it. That's the so-called Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen pair that you generate in this way. So the entire teleport is then just you take a register of 3 qubits in that case. 2 of them, you just take the tail, right? So those will be the qubits 1, 2, say, and qubit 0 is the head. And then you run EPR on the tail that generates that EPR pair on qubits 1 and 2. You then run a CNOT between 0 and 1. And then you do a Hadamard on qubit 0. And then this M here is a measurement, right? Before I mentioned the measurement that creates classical information. So you measure the first qubit in Qs prime. And then this is a classical control. So it basically takes whatever that value was of the measurement and it applies an X to that result. Then you measure the qubit number 0 and you do another binary control of a different operator. It's called Z operator. And then the whole thing looks like this. So this is automatically rendered in liquid. So you just kind of give it that code in F#. You say render, and it produces a diagram like this. Very, very useful for research purposes. And then you see the entire circuit. That circuit has been described in the literature as teleportation circuit. And lo and behold, it produces exactly the circuit. It allows you to simulate it. Oh, I don't have that here, but I'll show you in a moment in the demo. You can easily simulate that and see that at the end, whatever you feed in here, whatever quantum state you feed in here, you will retrieve it out here in the destination. And these 2 things can be very far apart. People have done that in, I think there's one experiment going from Tenerife to another island, where they've kind of teleported a quantum information that way. It goes for many miles, more than 50 miles. Dave has also done Shor's algorithm. Of course, that quickly runs out of memory, but he's pushed the limit, and he was able to factor, I think the largest was a 14-bit number. Okay, so you need, for that particular algorithm, you need 2 times n plus 3, where n is the bit size of the number you want to factor, so you needed 27 quantum bits. Oh, sorry, I'll just 28 plus 3, 31 quantum bits. And there were millions of gates in that algorithm that needed to be done. But he ran it for many days, and lo and behold, at the end, he got the factor. He got the factorization of that number. Of course, that's a piece of cake. In a classical machine, you get that. Like you don't even notice, right? It's that the number is not large enough. But the point about Shor's algorithm is that once you go to bit size of like 1,000, the scaling here will be you maybe need 1 billion gates or so, but it will not be the lifetime of the universe that you would have to wait. Right? You might have to wait maybe a day if you get very, very fast gates. But we could do that. We could do that if you actually have then a proper quantum machine. Any questions about that?
You're basically creating an electronic circuit? Is that what this...
Sorry?
Are you basically just trying to simulate an electronic circuit?
Yes.
That would...
Yes.
What would
You
happen?
can see it that way too. It is very similar to like a circuit in electronics that you would make out of AND and say just NAND gates, right? Only that we have a different gate set. We have these controlled NOT gates and a bunch of other gates, but essentially it's like that. It's like a net list of gates, and then we want to walk that net list and update the state vector in each time step. So that's what this classical simulation does. Once we have a quantum computer, of course, that will be much more efficient, right? And it will not have the scalability issues that we run out of memory, because by doing these gates very locally, we will affect that exponential size underlying space. That's kind of the idea. I didn't really talk about what the gate sets are, because that's very technical, but there are many proposals for gate sets. All these different technologies have kind of their preferred gate set. And much of the art of quantum computing is to tweak that gate set into a fault-tolerant gate set, which is resilient against noise. Think of a quantum computer as a computer that has to compute with many imperfect gates and nevertheless produce a very reliable output. And it's really mind-boggling that it's even possible in view of the fact that there's no copying possible. You would think that the way to battle noise is to copy and kind of get redundancy that way, but we cannot have that. It's not possible. But still you can sort of make redundancy by encoding in a specific basis, and that can be shown to protect against noise. And that way you can make robust gates that scale up.
So can you keep the gates powered to be a particular state so that you can reproduce the results?
Yes, by and large. So what you need to do is, so that's all the logical gates without error correction. What you will have to do in practice is after each logical gate, you will have to do a round of error correction, or maybe many rounds. Error correction basically has to be on in the background all the time, trying to remove as much errors in your system as possible. There are many problems with that because to remove errors is sort of similar to removing heat from a computer. It kind of heats up when there's noise. So you must bring code objects in all the time. So you can bring in some code qubits. They will be used to store syndrome information about the errors, and then you kind of have to remove them, cool them down again, bring them back in. But that needs to be going on in the background all the time to kind of just make it resilient. I'm not really showing that here. Again, Dave has done simulations where he composes the logical gates with the actual noise, and then you can see if it actually is tolerating a lot of noise. Usually it's not tolerating a lot of noise. So if the physical error rate is something like 10 to the minus 2, that means there's kind of one faulty operation in 100. That's kind of the limit to where you can go with many of the coding schemes. If you have a higher error rate, the schemes typically break. Many schemes even require a much lower error rate, like one faulty operation in 1,000 or so, right? Some codes require that much. And that's also kind of very, very hot topics in quantum computing is finding the best error correction strategies to make the best gate sets. And the core group has a lot of people working in that, questions like that, to make the best gates. All right, if there are no more questions, I'm going to show you a bit of code now. So you can get a liquid from GitHub. Just go on the station Q site and then /liquid. It's a standard GitHub repository. You can clone it or you can download it. And click on download it, for instance. I'm not going to do it here. I don't know what my bandwidth is like, but I've done it beforehand. So it's in my download folder somewhere. And you just open up the zip. I'm going to show you how to install it. It's basically a trivial installation process because you just need to extract it onto, say, this. Can you guys see that? Is it too small, or can you see? Basically, just extract it into C, and then you have liquid, and you can run it. It's just a binary you get there. It comes with the DLLs for the simulation engine, and it has a lot of examples for programs. So if you want to play around with it. That teleportation program that I showed you before is, for instance, there and a bunch of other examples. It makes sense to rename, by default, GitHub always calls it master. It makes sense to rename that because Dave has some hard-coded path information in there where to find the plugins for latex support, right? You want to generate all these nice rendered circuits, we give the path information that's hard-coded. So you get a repository that looks like this. So you have a bin folder that has the DLL, so you can run liquid from there. There's documentation, so it's there's a PDF manual, it's 100 pages or so, really nice. But there's also an online documentation like this, like the MSDN kind of style. So you can see the objects, click on them. You see what the classes are, you can open the classes, look at the properties and the methods and so on. And also there is kind of a, you can track issues in GitHub. You can open an issue if you find an issue, bug reports can be sent that way. There's also a mailing list, and Dave is very responsive. Dave and Alan Geller, they're both kind of maintaining that. There's a Linux version. And basically you just have to run mono, but it's essentially all the same things that you have in the Windows version, you get the DLLs. And if you run it under mono, for instance, what I do sometimes, I run it in the VM, where the Linux installed, and they can run mono, and then you say mono liquid, and whatever you do in the standard liquid, you can run it under Linux as well. There's a samples folder that has a ton of examples. For instance, a lot of chemistry examples, all this cryptic looking stuff here, CH4, whatever, H2, those are specific molecules that they've simulated using liquid. And if you have time, I can show you some of that too. There's also examples that have noise modeling, so if you want to kind of simulate what happens to ideal gates when there's noise, there's simulations there. There's small examples like teleport, and QECC is again the IARPA codes. Source is the actual source. You get a solution file and you can build your own version of liquid. I'm going to show you in a moment how to do that. And user code, there we hope that ultimately we get more and more people outside our organization contributing to liquid and kind of providing their libraries and their examples. Right now it's kind of not very much. We only have a few examples there. But for instance, we had just a programming challenge where students submitted projects, so that would be a great outlet, for instance, for that code that we will get there. So what I want to do first is just show you how to run liquid. So let's fire up the shell. Let's go into C liquid. And in the binary folder there's liquid. So you can just type liquid, and the first time you run it, it will prompt you to accept the license terms. So it is under MSR license, which is kind of liberal for academic use, but it's sort of restricted for commercial use. So you can find the license terms on the GitHub site. So if you're happy with that, you just press yes, and then it says thank you, and pretty much that's all it will do. So I have to kind of kill that now and restart it. So next time you start it, it looks different. So it puts a license file somewhere on your machine. What you see here is that kind of there's several tests built in, and by our convention, they all start with 2 underscores. That's kind of our internal convention. So what you can do now is you can say liquid, and let's run one of these built-in examples. For instance, Shor's algorithm is built in, so you can factor 15. And I give it here another parameter false, meaning don't apply any optimizations yet. Take the circuit as it comes out of Shor's algorithm and walk each gate and simulate the dynamics. And what you see is it will tell you how many bits it would need for that. So if it's 15, it's a 4-bit number. So you will need 2n plus 3, which is like 2n is like 8 plus 3, you need 11 qubits. It tells you how much memory it needs from the get-go. It tells you what the probability would be if you just were to guess the answer. It's a ridiculously small number, right? You might be able to guess the answer. That would give a very high chance of finding the factor. If you run Shor, actually here the probability is even lower than random guess. And then you see as it walks through that algorithm, it produces measurement results, and that's the measured bit vector. And from that bit vector, it then does a classical post-processing. And it turns out that eventually it finds the factors from the classical post-processing. 5 times 3. Big deal, right? It can factor that number. Here it shows sort of, the first column is the thread number. In that case, it's just 1 thread in total. The second set here is just execution time measured in minutes. I think it's seconds, sorry. I think it's measured in seconds. And in general, you can have several tasks, several threads running at the same time, and they can be running in the same log file. In that case, it's just executing in one. Let's do a larger example. So let's run. Let's do 55. There you see that for 55 you would need already 15 qubits. You need more memory. The probability to guess the result just by guessing, factoring by guessing, is already quite low. It drops very quickly, actually. It goes to 0 very quickly to just guess. And the probability of Shor is still decent. So that for larger and larger number, that probability will not go to 0. It will scale like 1 over log n or so. And then here we see how that solution vector is produced bit by bit. But you have to wait till you produce all the 11 bits all the 12 bits start from 0 of the vector, and that takes a long time. So they've implemented optimizations where he takes the big circuit, takes the gates and groups them together so that you form kind of block matrices, and you don't walk gate by gate. First you kind of grow them into larger objects, and then you simulate those larger objects. That makes a lot of sense for classical simulation. I'm just going to kill that process here. So if you do that, and it's just basically changing the flag to true, then you will see, or you see, that it's much faster. It allows you to hopefully get that solution vector in a reasonable amount of time. It looks like it's going to terminate in less than 20 seconds. And kind of we get that the period out here. And from the period you do classical post-processing, and here, okay, for here, it can happen that even though you get a non-trivial period vector, it can happen that you don't succeed. It's a probabilistic algorithm. So we just picked a bad run and it didn't succeed, so we have to run that thing again. Hopefully it works this time. But it's really unpredictable if we terminate or not. And wait, I picked the unoptimized one. It also logs a bunch of other information, how long it takes to actually compile it into that aggregated form. The memory, you can track what happens to your process in terms of memory usage. And, oh no, okay, again, found trivial vectors. Sorry about that. It can happen. I mean, the probability to get the factorization is only like 38% or so, right? You would expect that on average, you need to run that thing maybe three times or maybe even more. Let's see what happens now. Okay, lo and behold, finally we found the factorization. 55 is 5 times 11, and we got success here. Yeah.
So is it using random number generation in there, or what's
Yes.
causing? Okay, so you're pulling random numbers.
There's basically just built .NET random number generators built in, and of course it will depend on what they do, right? If you run that whole thing in a virtual machine, I think you got to be careful. And there was a bug at some point that it was kind of running always in the same kind of initial seed. Then you get the same behavior. But I think now it's improved that it kind of takes some physical characteristics into account that we do it now. All right, any more questions about that example? Let me show you the teleport example. That's lightning fast. So what happens here is that it generates a random state, then sends it through a teleportation circuit, and what you want to see at the output is the same state. You actually, in all these runs, I think there are 10 runs here, you get the same state. It's only that you need to have different corrections. You cannot predict that a priori. It will be a random what corrections you need to do. There was this X correction and the Z correction, if you remember. So that depends on this bit pattern here, and that's completely unpredictable. So if I would run it again, with very high probability there will be different corrections that you need. But it passes the test. So this circuit is completely simulated. And what this also does, so they put in here rendering. So you can look at the teleportation circuit. Just like look at the HTML file. And it's kind of a SVG. It's an SVG graphic, so scalable graphics. You can enlarge that. Right, and get a feel for the circuit. For a person doing research in that area, it's tremendously useful. You can fold it, so that circuit, as you can see, it was not really parallelized. You could shift that gate and make it parallel to this. So fold does an aggressive fold, tries to shift as much as possible to the left in parallelized gates. So that's nice, it makes it typically much more compact. And by the way, these like the single line is a quantum bit, a double line is a classical bit. So here these double lines indicate that the information after the measurement is classical, and then you need to do a correction of that quantum bit depending on that classical information. Then afterwards you get that answer. So the optimizations that are built in are growing of gates. So what growing does, it just chunks small amount of qubits into bigger blocks. And then it gives it an identifier that has no particular meaning, it's just an identifier chosen by the system. But you can also render those things. It's sometimes useful to get a feeling for what the algorithm does. Let me show you how to build your own version of it. Go into source and fire up the solution. First time you do it, you tell that you trust the code that comes from the web. It's trusted. And it's built for reuse. And it's a little main. So that's a typical F# file. So you have a namespace here, you have a module, it uses a bunch of dot. Can you see it, or I can make it larger? Hopefully it's large enough. You can, those are all .NET. That's a .NET namespace. Util operations is part of Liquid. So you cannot really look inside that, that's part of the DLL. Here is a gate, that's a predefined gate. And really what this program does is just you get an entry point here and you got an attribute. So whenever you put that attribute LQD, it means you get another entry point, right? Typically you want to have a bunch of entry points for Liquid that you can hand in for the user sample, and then you're actually here in the code. So we could build that. I'll give it here the name of our entry point, user sample, and then we can control F5, build the thing. Hopefully we'll start a shell and just say whatever is here in user sample, and that show command is just a printf, really. It's the only difference is that it's thread safe. So if you use a lot of shows and you have code that writes into the same log file from many locations, it will not create any conflicts, and that's sometimes useful. Okay, so this is working fine. So this log here that message. So let's write our first little quantum program. So instead of just showing that, let's just define a new function. So are you guys familiar with functional programming at all? So who's not familiar? Okay, a couple. So typically everything is an expression in a functional program. Everything is a function. So the way to declare stuff is with a let keyword. So you can say, let's define a new function. Let's call it quantum function. And then it will take some arguments typically, and then you say it equals, and then you get the body of the function. Okay? And down here we will write what it does. So what's the input? It's supposed to manipulate quantum objects. So let's hand it a list of qubits. So there's a built-in type called qubits. So what this will do is it will define a function that takes as an input a list of qubits. This is all Visual Studio. You have full IntelliSense support, so you can hover over things. So you can hover over qfunc. Right now it cannot really tell you much because we haven't written the body of the function, but it can tell you already that the input will be q's, which will be qubits, the output will be some type. Okay, you can hover over what qubits actually are, and then you see, this is a built-in type in Liquid, qubits, and it even tells you a little bit for what that is. Qubits is a shorthand for list of qubits. So what is our function supposed to do? Well, let's apply just a measurement to that list of qubits. M is a built-in gate into Liquid, so-called measurement operator. It performs a measurement of just one qubit, and when you apply an operator to a list of qubits, by default it takes the first occurrence it can actually apply to, and then it will only do that. So it will take the first qubit count, apply the measurement to it, and then it will leave everybody else alone. If you want it to be applied to all, there's another kind of shorthand. The so-called, we call it bow tie. It means if you do that, then it would measure the entire registry. But if you just want to measure the head of that list, that will do it. Okay. So our user sample, we call that qfunc. But of course, first we got to create sort of a quantum state and then measure it. So how to do that? So actually, let's first declare. Let's first declare a register that will just log our statistics. Okay? So let's just create a register of length 2. It's a .NET array. Okay? And we will just, like, when we measure our qubit, we get 0 or 1 as a result. So we just take an array of length 2, and we will log how many times we get 0 in the first location, And how many times we get 1, we'll lock that into the second location of the element. Next, we declare our quantum state, and that's again built into liquid. It's a liquid keyword. The cat keyword takes as an argument the number of qubits you want to create. So you could create 1,000. It's not a problem. You only get a problem if you want to simulate 1,000. So we're not going to do that. We just simulate. We're going to simulate 1. We're going to start with it. And then what we will do is we will run that measurement operation, say 1,000 times. So, and kind of what's nice about F sharp is it's really multi-paradigm. It doesn't, like Haskell, for instance, locks you in very functional thinking, everything recursive and whatnot. In F sharp, there's no problem having a loop, and you can mix it all up. It's a lot of support for object-oriented stuff. So I like that. So let's apply QFunk to our register, but we have to first actually say what are the Qs. So we can say that Qs is are the qubits that belong to that cat. So that's a way you can get a quantum register from a cat. You can say take that cat, but let's reset it because we want to do that many times. And every time we go through, we want to reset it to the 0 state in the first place. So let's reset it. Let's apply then QFunk to it. And then when we're done, we want to kind of log our statistics. So okay, let's pick up the measurement result. Let's call that B. So then our Qs will have a head node. It will be measured, right? Because we're going to measure it here. Then it will be kind of a bit. There will be a bit value, and it stores in a bit value V. There it will be stored bitwise. That's kind of a bit complicated, but you can do kind of dot-driven discovery of that object. If you have just Qs and you hit dot, you see all the methods and properties that come with it. And you can say head. Okay, that will be the first one. What are its methods and properties? It will have a bit. And what does a bit have? It has a way to dump it. It has quality and so on. But it also has a value. And it needs to be, in order to pick it up, it needs to be measured. If you do stuff like that and then it's not measured, you get a runtime. Exception. So then, now let's update the stats. So you can say stats V. So if you measure the 0, we will increase 0 by 1. If you measure 1, we will increase 1 by 1. So it's just increase whatever we had by 1. And at the end, let's do a printf. So it's a show. So we measured, say, 0 we measured that many times, and 1 we measured that's an integer, and 1 is that many times. Okay. And then we just say stats here, stats 0, and stats 1. Okay, and that should be about it. This should be our first little program that runs 10,000 times the state initialization. The 0 state, then we run QFunk, which measures that qubit, then we pick up the measurement result and we log it into our stats. Okay. So what do you think should be the result of that program after 10,000 runs? 50/50. Well, we start in the 0 state and measure it in the same basis. Right? If you are in the 0-1 basis and you prepare your system in that same basis, you for sure get the same result as you got 0. So you get 100% 0. If everything's correct, you should get 100% 0 state at the end of the day. And lo and behold, we get 100 times, 10,000 times we measure 0. Weird, right? That was a little weird. We get 10,000 times 0 and only 0, we never get the result. So let's do something slightly more interesting. Before we measure it, we rotate it out of our basis. Okay, so then we actually get a probability distribution. We can do that by doing the Hadamard gate. That rotates it kind of maximally out of the basis. So that's the gate actually used. There was a question earlier about quantum cryptography. That's exactly the basis that's used for that. So you either send your light in the standard basis, or you rotate it 45 degrees and set it in that basis. And you don't tell the other guy which one you chose. So that we did in our case, and indeed we get a 50-50 chance now to measure 0 or 1. it's probabilistic, so we don't get exactly half of the runs 0 and half of the runs 1, but roughly we get that. And if you do it again, of course it's random, so it will be, so this time it's less zeros than the ones before it was more. Cannot predict that, but very, very likely it's like binomially distributed around 5,000. Right? You expect actually 5,000, maybe plus square root of n is the variance of the experiment. Okay, great. So if you want to enlarge your gate set, it's very easy. It's an extensible language, so you can declare new gates like this. This one is a rotation around an arbitrary angle. The angle is a flow. Again, it takes a bunch of qubits and applies that gate. And the gate declaration itself is here. It kind of invokes a new object, gate. It has a name. If you're nice, you can give it a help function. You don't have to. But then you can declare what the gate does. And here it's like using matrix type, right? You kind of gotta say what the matrix elements are. So 0, 0, it's the complex, it's a real value, and the imaginary value of that entry. 0, 1 is the matrix entry 0, 1. And you got all these 4 entries, and kind of it performs a rotation around that angle, 2-dimensional rotation. And now instead of running h, we could do a broad x by some angle. So think of an angle by divided by 2, for instance. That would be a rotation around an angle of 2 pi over 4. And that actually turns out to be the same as the 45-degree rotation that we had before, so we get the same behavior. But now we could also do like a rotation around an angle 2 pi over 8. Then we get roughly 85% to get 0, and we can do any angle now that we like. I think I'm running out of time, right? Do I have like 3 more minutes or so? Can I show you like an entangling operation and stuff? So it's really nice to play around with that stuff. So you can, for instance, say, okay, let's have a whole register this time, and let's take all the qubits that are not in the not the head, so everything in the tail. And let's do a C0 from the head to everybody in the tail. Okay? And then at the end, let's measure them, but this time let's measure them all. We have that type. Okay, that kind of applies the rotation to the first guy here, and then everybody in the tail, fused tail. And you saw the wiggly lines, right? So that is all type checked in Visual Studio. So if you have violations there, you see it immediately. It helps to rule out a bunch of errors in that already. And then, so we rotate the first qubit, everything in the tail, we do a C0 with the source, head, and the target of these. Okay, so it rotates the first, and then there's a sequence of C0s. It creates what in quantum mechanics is called so-called cat state, after Schrödinger. Schrödinger's cat. Schrödinger predicted that there might be some really weird states that correspond to a cat being alive and dead at the same time. Basically, that's a version of creating a state like that. So let's create a cat with n tails, sort of. And the way we want to do it, we want to have n as a parameter, which will tell us how many states will be in there. And okay, what we want to do is we want to measure again the head, but we want to make sure that it's an entangled state. So for everybody in the tail, we want to check whether it's indeed the same as the head information. So if q dot bit is different from q dot head dot bit, then let's throw an exception. So we can say fail with this should never happen. Okay, if you ever see that and then something is wrong with our way to generate
QS dot tail.
Okay, thank you. And save me. Thanks. And then we also collect the stats. So that should work. Let's change all of these. Turn on the qubits. Okay. And then let's put this in this one. And hopefully we'll again see the same behavior that we get 84. Okay, you don't see anything. Okay, it's still running. It's kind of slow. Well, we have 10 qubits now, right? We created a state with like 10 qubits. The first one we rotate, and then we do all these signals. So it's slow. And then we will actually see that we measure 0 the same number of times, which is what we expect, because we expect 0, 0, 0 as one possible outcome, and 1, 1, 1 as the other. That's kind of the macroscopic state. 0, 0, 0. It could be now many, many, many. And 1, 1, 1, that will be the other range. But we will now, because of our check here, right? We check whether all the bits are the same. We make sure that they're all the same as the head, so the only possible results we can see are 0 and 1. But you saw also that this was kind of slow. So what you can do now instead is you could say, you can compile it into circuit-induced circuit optimization. That'll be the last thing I do. So you can take the function that we defined, Q-func, and let's take the qubits, and so that compiles our function Q-func, which was just a mathematical function. It now compiles it into an internal representation that represents a quantum circuit. So, and now once you have that, now you can make optimizations. For instance, you can say circuit dot grow gates. Then, instead of applying that, I want to say circ.run of q's. That should have the same effect now, that you take the circuit that we compiled and we apply to q's. Only now we have grown the gates from that little blocks to larger units, and hopefully we see an advantage that this is faster. It was a little bit faster than the previous one. I don't know if you saw it, but it was really fast. Finally show you that we can also write that into a log file. So for that there's like a circ render ht, and you can give it a file name, L1, and you can also dump that into the file, into a log file. You can say, okay, let's do the same for another. And file, circuit. Okay. So that will take the circuit, compile it, dump it into a file, and then do the grow gates operation, and then dump it into a file. So now we can look at these two files, see what it actually did. Source. Okay, that's our creation of the cat state, right? We do our rotation, then we do that cascade of many control nodes from the head to everybody in the tail, and then we measure everybody at the end of the day. And then what the grow gates does finally is grows all these C nodes into one big chunk. It's a very sparse matrix. You can look at the matrix, you have access to that internal data structure. It logs it into a log file, log. There you actually see how the circuit is represented internally. So we kind of wrote it into that. With our gates, first we create the local rotation here, then we have our first C node, second C node, and so on. All these C nodes. And then further down here, that's the kind of unrolled thing where we group it all into a big box. Then it's just like a big permutation. Those are the list of the permute vectors, right, in hex. Tells you the list. And kind of classically, it makes a lot of sense to run that big permutation instead of walking a long list of things. All right, let me stop here. Thanks a lot for bearing with me that long. Thanks for your attention.